Hi class, today we're going to discuss Paley's analogical design argument. Um, Before we get into that, reminder, you should have watched the previous video that transitions us from cosmological to design arguments. If you haven't done so, make sure to go do it now. Because there, we are really setting up the groundwork by introducing how analogical reasoning works generally. So let's briefly review that. Any argument from analogy fits into the form entity A has properties LMN dot 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 through some Z. Entity B has properties LMN dot dot dot. Therefore, entity B probably has property Z. Arguments by analogy are always inductive. What we need is something we know has property Z, that's entity A, and something we are inferring has property Z, that is entity B. And then in order for the argument to run, we need known similarities. So we use known similarities to infer a further similarity. So once we have that in place, we've really done a lot of the work because now we know what Paley's argument needs to do. And of course, it actually does. So first of all, he is trying to infer design in the universe or some part of it. What does that mean? We need something we know is designed. Paley uses a watch. Since 1700s, we're talking a pocket watch. And then we have something we are inferring is designed, the universe or some part of it. Again, I always leave that a little vague because design arguments can go from anything super specific like the structure of the human eye to general stuff like the rate of the expansion after the Big Bang or laws of celestial mechanics. So let's just simplify, and from now on I'm just going to say the universe. So normally, to finish the analogy, now we just need to go with known similarities between the watch and the universe. But wait a minute. Don't forget we need to not only present the argument, but evaluate it. And so to evaluate arguments from analogy, we need relevant similarities and absence of relevant dissimilarities. And remember from last video, relevance is relative because there's no such thing as relevant period. There's only relevant to Z. So in this case, since Z is design, we need to be able to determine what similarities the watch has to the universe that are similar to design. Here's why we're reading Paley instead of some of the other philosophers who wrote before him, because Paley has a really novel, clever way to determine whether a given property is relevant to design. And that is to introduce a third entity, the stone. So what's indicative of the stone? Paley says, well, you're walking along the beach, you see a stone, you don't immediately infer design. However, if you're walking along the beach and you see a pocket watch, you do immediately infer design. So the relevance of the stone is that we don't immediately infer design on the stone. Now, how does that help us sort out relevance? Here's the clever part. Ready? If a watch and the stone can share the same property, that means that property is not relevant to the design inference. So, or put negatively, you might say, if a stone had that property, I would infer design. So let's just take a simple example. Suppose you made the following argument from analogy. Well, look, the watch has gold in it and is designed. The universe has gold in it, therefore the universe is designed. Is that a good argument? No. Why not? Because having gold in it is not relevant to design. Prove it. No problem, says Paley. Here's a rock. Ask yourself, if I saw a rock on the beach that had gold in it, a fleck of gold, would I infer design? No. What does that tell us? That having gold in it is not relevant to the design inference. This one simple move, this introducing a third entity by Paley, allows us to, first of all, filter out the thousands, millions, infinite number of properties that are shared between the watch and the universe that are irrelevant to design. and then lets us prove that the ones he suggests are relevant are relevant. So let's take one more example. Suppose you say, well, the watch is round. The solar system is round. Therefore, the solar system is designed. Is that a good entity? Or is that a good argument? Let's check. Well, if I saw a round stone on the beach, would I infer it was designed? No. Which means being round is not relevant to design. So what is our goal? All we have to do to finish Paley's argument from design is to identify properties shared between the watch and the universe that are relevant to design. How do we do that? By showing that these properties are not only shared by the watch and the universe, but they are not shared by the rock. Or put negatively, if the rock did have those properties, then we would infer design. So, given that, I hope you have found some of these similarities that Paley indicates. So, here's the basic list for Paley. In no particular order, I'm going to give a different order than Paley does to really show how the rock works here. One similarity he gives is a high degree of precision. So, first of all, does a watch have a high degree of precision? Of course. Does the universe have a high degree of precision? Of course. Is precision relevant to design? Let's check. Let's say you were walking down the beach and you found a highly precise rock. That is, instead of a round rock, suppose you found a perfectly spherical rock. Then would you infer it was designed? Yes, I would. And you can actually buy those. What does that tell us? That a high degree of precision is relevant to design. So that's how it works. So let's talk about the other properties that Paley identifies. First and foremost, he's going to say, well, there's complexity in the watch of the universe. Now, complexity is a technical term meaning having parts. So, the watch has parts, the universe has parts. Is having parts relevant to design? Maybe. But they are if the parts are what he calls harmonious, that is, working together. So, does the watch have parts that work together? Yes. Does the universe have parts that work together? Yes. Is that relevant to design? Let's check. If you found a rock that had parts that work together, would you infer design? Sure. My favorite example is if you had like a stone Rubik's Cube. Let's take another one. Again, another similarity Paley's going to give is purposiveness. And here we have to be careful. Because sometimes defenders of the design argument will get a little sloppy and say purpose. And then the skeptic will immediately and rightly ask, okay, smart guy, what is the purpose of the universe? And we have no answer to that we know of, or at least no good answer. And so Paley actually addresses that kind of objection in the optional reading, the second chapter I made available. And there, he says, well, purposiveness is all we need. So imagine you found some sort of box, and you don't know what the box does, but you can see various gears and levers, and if you turn this gear, it rotates this gear, and if you pull this lever, it disattaches this gear. Even if I have no idea what this box does, it has purposiveness. It has things that sure seem to fulfill a purpose. And Paley says that's enough. We still identify design from purposiveness. So once more, does the watch have purposiveness? Sure. Does the universe have purposiveness? Sure. Therefore, that should be indicative of design. So suppose you were walking down the beach and you see a rock that's sitting on a stack of papers. That is, it's serving the purpose of keeping the papers from blowing away. Well, you'd probably infer design there. The last one he identifies is order. Is the watch orderly? Sure. Is the universe orderly? Sure. Is order relevant to design? Well, if you found a set of rocks and a checkerboard pattern on the beach, would you infer they were designed? Sure. So very roughly speaking, because we know how arguments from analogy work, we know most of the Paley. So Paley just needs to identify properties that are relevant to design that are shared by both the watch and the universe. He gives complex, harmonious, orderly, purposive, precise. That's your list. Let's see if I can do that again. Complex, harmonious, orderly, purposive, precise. That's the list. But Paley goes further. If I ask you to explain Paley's watch analogy on the exam, your answer would not be complete if you don't give it the justice Paley does. And Paley makes his argument much stronger in the technical sense by showing a good reason to think those properties are relevant to design. He introduces the rock as a filter that can show that each of those are relevant to design because the rock that we don't infer design doesn't have them, whereas if we did see a rock with that property, we would infer design immediately. And notice I keep saying immediately infer design, because if Paley's right, there is a sense in which the rock is designed, but that's why I keep saying, well, we don't immediately infer design on the rock. So that's the Paley in a nutshell. Make very sure you could explain that argument on your own. We're eventually going to evaluate that, but we're going to evaluate it through the lens of Hume. And so let's briefly introduce the Hume readings, maybe not so briefly. So we will have 3 readings from the same work in Hume, so it's worth saying a few words about it. The work is Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. It is very often thought to be the most important work ever written in the history of philosophy. And so, yeah, we're going to read about it some, for sure. And so it helps to know what's going on in the dialogue. First of all, don't think Platonic dialogues. Hume was not a fan of Plato's dialogues. He hated dialogues where just, in his words, nothing but nonsense is put in the words of one. So think of Euthyphro versus Socrates. Instead, he liked Cicero's dialogues where everybody had something interesting to say. And so Hume's dialogues have 3 people who are arguing, and because of their positions, every single argument is going to be 2 against 1, but it's not always the same 2. So, very interesting read, but it helps if you understand who these 3 people are, roughly speaking. One person in the argument is Demia. Demia is someone who thinks that cosmological arguments can be successful, but doesn't think design arguments can be successful. And there are people like that for reasons we'll talk about. But first of all, careful, because the cosmological argument was called an a priori argument during Hume's time, even though it actually wasn't. And Hume's actually the one who proved it, but he still adopted the language. So whenever they say argument a priori, A, realize they're talking about the cosmological argument. B, realize that even though it's called that, cosmological arguments are not a priori for reasons Hume proved in 1739. Dialogues were written much later in 1776, by the way. Anyway, so why would someone support the cosmological argument and not the design argument? Because Demia doesn't think we should draw an analogy between human minds and God's minds. He thinks that there's something wrong with that. So Demia gives thumbs up to the cosmological argument, thumbs down to the design argument. The second arguer is Cleanthes. Cleanthes, instead, does the opposite. He thinks that cosmological arguments can't work, or don't work anyway, but that design arguments do, specifically the analogical design arguments. And third is Philo. Philo's the skeptic who doesn't think either of those approaches can succeed. So remember, when I say approaches, I mean cosmological versus design arguments in general. So that means in any discussion, it's going to be 2 against 1. The first reading in the dialogues is going to be about the analogical design argument. Specifically, we're looking at the criticisms. And so where we will start the dialogues is in the previous chapter, Cleanthes had just given his version of the analogical design argument. Wasn't quite as good as Paley's because it didn't have a rock. So but very similar in other ways. I think Hume used a shipbuilder. But anyway, all the criticisms apply the same. And so here's what you should look for in that first reading. Hume, depending on which Hume scholar you read, Hume gives at least 10 objections to analogical design arguments. You will be responsible for 4. Which 4? By an astonishing lack of coincidence, the 4 that are listed on the review sheet. Having said that, I really want you to go and do this reading on your own first and see if you can worry out those objections that Hume has. But if you want some help in doing that, there is an IEP article I can vouch for. The IEP is the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I put the URL on the board a few times this year, but it's iep.utm.edu. If you go there, then go to, it's all alphabetical, so you go to H, you go to Hume, you go to Hume : religion, and there's a whole section in that article on Hume's objections to analogical design arguments. Again, you don't need to know all of them, just the 4 that are on the review sheet. Those are going to be the relevant ones, and those will apply to both the analogical design argument Cleanthes gives, and more importantly, the Paley one that we just talked about. So watch for that as well, and we will revisit Hume's objections next time.